The ancient chronicles speak of a city that defied the very laws of nature itself, where divine will shaped stone and mortal ambition reached toward the heavens. In the mists of Morrowind's tumultuous history lies the tale of Vivec City, a metropolis that rose from marshland and volcanic ash to become one of the most magnificent settlements ever conceived by mortal hands. Yet this is not merely a story of architectural triumph or political power. This is the chronicle of a city that existed at the intersection of the mortal and divine realms, where the boundaries between myth and reality grew thin as morning fog over the inner sea. Long before the Red Year brought devastation to the province of Morrowind, before the Ministry of Truth plummeted from the sky in a cascade of fire and ruin, there stood a city unlike any other in the known world. Vivec City was not simply built upon the landscape, but rather grew from it, as if the very earth itself had been convinced to take new form through whispered promises and divine intervention. The cantons that housed its citizens rose like islands from the carefully channeled waters that flowed between them, creating a unique urban environment where bridges and boats served as the primary means of movement between districts. The founding of this remarkable settlement traces back to the early First Era, though the precise details remain shrouded in the complex mythology that surrounds the figure of Vivec himself. According to the most widely accepted historical accounts, the construction began during the height of the First Council, when the great houses of the Dunmer sought to establish a capital worthy of their growing power and influence. Yet even these official histories acknowledge that the city's creation involved forces that extended far beyond conventional architectural planning and engineering expertise. The location chosen for this grand undertaking lay along the southern coast of Vardenfell, where the volcanic activity of Red Mountain had created a landscape of unique geological properties. The builders selected a site where natural springs emerged from the earth, providing fresh water that could be channeled throughout the urban environment. The marshlands that dominated the region presented both challenges and opportunities, offering rich soil for agriculture while requiring innovative solutions for stable construction foundations. The earliest structures followed traditional Dunmer architectural principles, emphasizing functionality and harmony with the natural environment. Stone quarried from the nearby hills provided the primary building material, while the abundant volcanic glass found throughout the region served both decorative and practical purposes. The characteristic blue-grey coloration that would later define Vivec's aesthetic emerged from the local stone, creating a visual unity that tied the growing settlement to its geographical origins. As construction progressed through the decades, the city began to take on the distinctive form that would make it famous throughout Tamriel. The Canton System emerged as the dominant organizational principle, with each major district constructed as a self-contained artificial island connected to its neighbours through an intricate network of bridges and waterways. This design reflected both practical considerations regarding the marshy terrain and deeper philosophical concepts about community organisation and social hierarchy. The foreign quarter canton served as the primary entry point for visitors and merchants arriving from other provinces. Its architecture deliberately incorporated elements that would feel familiar to imperial traders, Nord craftsmen, and Redguard scholars, creating a welcoming environment for the international commerce that was essential to the city's economic prosperity. The warehouses and trading houses that lined its waterfront bustled with activity, as goods from across Tamriel changed hands in transactions that enriched both foreign merchants and local intermediaries. The Hlalu Canton reflected the mercantile values of House Hlalu, whose members had embraced imperial customs and trading practices more enthusiastically than their more traditional cousins. The buildings within this district displayed architectural influences from Cyrodiil, with broader windows and more elaborate decorative elements than were typical of traditional Dunmer construction. The canton housed the offices of trading companies, banking establishments, and commercial guilds that facilitated the complex financial arrangements necessary for large-scale international trade. In contrast, the Redaran canton maintained the austere aesthetic favoured by House Redaran, emphasising martial virtues and traditional values through its architectural choices. The structures within this district were built for durability rather than comfort, with thick walls and narrow windows that could withstand both natural disasters and potential sieges. The canton served as headquarters for military organisations and training facilities, where young Dunmer learned the combat skills that their culture valued so highly. The Telvanni canton presented perhaps the most unusual architectural environment within the city, reflecting the magical traditions and eccentric personalities of House Telvanni's wizard lords. The buildings within this district defied conventional construction principles, featuring impossible geometries and gravity-defying elements that demonstrated the mastery of mystical forces. Towers spiraled upward in patterns that hurt the eye to follow, while laboratories hidden beneath the waterline conducted experiments that were best kept away from public scrutiny. The Arena Canton provided entertainment and spectacle for both residents and visitors, housing the famous arena where gladiatorial contests and other public events drew crowds from across the province. The architecture of this district emphasized visibility and acoustics, with carefully designed seating areas that allowed thousands of spectators to witness the battles and ceremonies that took place within the central fighting area. The roar of the crowd during major events could be heard throughout the city, creating a sense of shared excitement that unified the diverse population. The Temple Canton stood as the spiritual heart of the entire settlement, housing the most sacred shrines and religious institutions that guided Dunmer's spiritual life. The architecture within this district reflected the solemnity and grandeur appropriate to its religious function, with soaring vaulting and intricate stonework that inspired awe in worshippers and visitors alike. The canton contained libraries of religious texts, training facilities for priests and temple guards, and administrative offices that coordinated religious activities throughout Morrowind. At the centre of this remarkable urban landscape rose the Palace of Vivec, a structure that defied easy categorization or description. The palace served simultaneously as a residence, administrative centre, temple, and symbol of divine authority that watched over the entire city. Its architecture incorporated elements from all the canton districts while transcending their individual limitations through design principles that seemed to operate according to rules known only to its divine inhabitant. The construction of the palace required techniques and materials that pushed the boundaries of mortal engineering capabilities. The foundation stones were quarried from sites scattered across Vardenfell, each selected for specific metaphysical properties that would enhance the structure's stability and symbolic power. The walls incorporated volcanic glass in patterns that created optical effects during certain times of day, causing the entire building to seem to glow with internal light when viewed from the proper angles. The interior spaces of the palace reflected the complex nature of its primary occupant, featuring chambers designed for meditation, audience halls capable of accommodating hundreds of visitors, private quarters that provided refuge from the demands of public life, and mysterious rooms whose purposes remained known only to Vivec himself. The architecture created a sense of movement and flow that encouraged contemplation while demonstrating the power and wisdom of the divine ruler who called it home. The daily life of Vivec City reflected the unique character of its urban environment, with residents adapting their routines to accommodate the challenges and opportunities presented by the Canton System. Transportation between districts required careful planning, as the bridges could become crowded during peak hours, while boat traffic needed to be coordinated to prevent accidents in the narrow waterways. The constant sound of water flowing between the cantons created a distinctive acoustic environment that residents learned to associate with home. The population of the city represented a remarkable diversity of backgrounds, interests, and occupations. Dunmer families who had lived in the region for generations shared neighbourhoods with recent immigrants from other provinces, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that was unusual for Morrowind. Merchants, craftsmen, scholars, soldiers, priests, and labourers all found their place within the urban ecosystem, contributing their skills and perspectives to the complex social fabric that held the community together. The economic life of the city centred around the natural advantages provided by its strategic location and unique infrastructure. The waterways that flowed between the cantons served as transportation routes for goods moving between the harbour and inland markets, while the bridges created natural gathering points where merchants could display their wares to passing customers. The constant flow of visitors drawn by the city's reputation as a centre of culture and learning provided a steady market for luxury goods and specialised services. The markets that flourished within the canton districts became legendary throughout Tamriel for their exotic offerings and sophisticated commercial practices. Traders arriving from distant provinces found themselves navigating not merely physical spaces, but complex social hierarchies that determined access to the most valuable commodities and profitable partnerships. The merchant houses that established themselves within the city developed elaborate protocols for conducting business that balanced traditional Dunmer customs with the practical necessities of international commerce. The agricultural systems that supported the growing population demonstrated remarkable innovation in adapting to the unique environmental conditions of the region. The marshlands surrounding the city provided fertile growing areas for crops that thrived in waterlogged soil, while terraced gardens built upon the canton foundations allowed for the cultivation of plants that required different drainage conditions. The integration of aquaculture with traditional farming methods created sustainable food production systems that could support a much larger population than the region had previously sustained. The emergence of specialized craft guilds within the city reflected the growing sophistication of its economic base. Master artisans who had perfected techniques for working with volcanic glass established workshops that produced decorative items prized throughout the empire. Smiths developed new alloys by combining traditional materials with volcanic minerals found only in the Vardenfell region, creating tools and weapons with properties that could not be replicated elsewhere. The reputation of Vivec's craftsmen spread far beyond Morrowind, attracting apprentices from distant provinces who sought to learn techniques that were closely guarded trade secrets. The educational institutions that developed within the city created an intellectual atmosphere that rivaled the greatest centres of learning in Tamriel. The libraries housed within the Temple Canton contained not only religious texts, but comprehensive collections of historical documents, magical treatises, and philosophical works that drew scholars from across the known world. The informal academies that emerged in various canton districts provided instruction in subjects ranging from practical skills like navigation and accounting to esoteric disciplines like theoretical mysticism and ancient linguistics. The cultural life of the city reflected its position as a meeting point between different traditions and ways of thinking. The theatres and performance spaces that operated within various cantons hosted entertainment that blended Dunmer storytelling traditions with artistic influences absorbed from contact with other provinces. Musicians developed new instruments and compositional techniques that incorporated the acoustic properties of the urban environment, creating musical forms that could only exist within the unique soundscape of the Canton System. The religious practices that evolved within the city demonstrated the complex relationship between traditional Dunmer spirituality and the divine presence that resided within the palace. The ordinary citizens who made their homes within the cantons maintained their ancestral veneration, while adapting their observances to acknowledge the unprecedented reality of a living God dwelling among them. The temple services incorporated elements of both ancient ritual and contemporary devotion, creating ceremonies that honored the past while embracing the transformative present. The architectural evolution of the city continued throughout its history as each generation of builders added their own contributions to the urban landscape. The bridges that connected the cantons grew more elaborate over time, incorporating decorative elements and functional additions that reflected changing aesthetic preferences and practical needs. The waterways themselves were gradually modified through careful engineering projects that improved drainage, enhanced transportation efficiency, and created new opportunities for commercial development. The defensive systems that protected the city represented a significant departure from traditional Dunmer military architecture. Rather than relying primarily on walls and towers, the designers took advantage of the water barriers that naturally separated the cantons to create a defensive network that could be adapted to meet different types of threats. The bridges could be destroyed or blocked to isolate compromised districts, while the waterways provided evacuation routes and defensive positions that gave defenders significant advantages over potential attackers. The administrative systems that governed the city required constant innovation to manage the complex challenges of urban life. The coordination between different canton districts necessitated new forms of bureaucratic organization that balanced local autonomy with citywide planning requirements. The legal frameworks that emerged to handle disputes between residents from different cultural backgrounds created precedents that influenced jurisprudence throughout Morrowind and beyond. The technological innovations that emerged from the city's unique environment had far-reaching implications for urban planning throughout Tamriel. The water management systems developed to maintain the canal network influenced hydraulic engineering projects in other provinces, while the architectural techniques perfected for building on unstable ground provided solutions for construction challenges in diverse geographical settings. The integration of magical and mundane engineering approaches created hybrid technologies that expanded the possibilities for future urban development. The social dynamics within the city created new forms of community organization that transcended traditional clan and house affiliations. Neighborhoods that developed around shared economic interests or cultural practices formed voluntary associations that provided mutual support and collective representation in city governance. The mixing of populations from different backgrounds led to the emergence of new cultural traditions that synthesized elements from various sources while developing distinctly local characteristics. The artistic achievements that flourished within this environment pushed the boundaries of traditional Dunmer creative expression. Sculptors working with the unique stone available in the region developed techniques that took advantage of its distinctive properties to create works that seemed to glow with internal light. Painters discovered new pigments derived from volcanic minerals that produced colors not found in conventional artistic palettes, leading to the development of visual styles that could only emerge from this specific geographical and cultural context. The intellectual ferment generated by the concentration of diverse minds and resources within the city produced advances in multiple fields of knowledge. Natural philosophers, studying the volcanic activity of the region, made discoveries about geological processes that advanced understanding throughout the scholarly community. Magical researchers working with materials and conditions unique to Vardenfell developed new theoretical frameworks that expanded the possibilities for mystical practice and investigation. The commercial networks that radiated outward from the city created economic relationships that connected remote regions of Tamriel through trade routes and financial arrangements. The banking houses that established operations within the city provided credit and currency exchange services that facilitated commerce across vast distances, while the merchant associations that formed to coordinate large-scale trading ventures spread Vivec's influence far beyond the borders of Morrowind. The seasonal rhythms that governed life within the city created a calendar of festivals and observances that reflected both natural cycles and the unique character of the urban environment. The spring floods that refreshed the canal system were celebrated with ceremonies that honored the life-giving properties of water, while the summer months brought festivals that took advantage of the long days and warm evenings to showcase the artistic achievements of the city's creative community. The autumn harvests from the surrounding agricultural areas were marked by elaborate feasts that brought together residents from all the cantons in shared celebration of abundance and community prosperity. The winter months presented their own distinctive character as the reduced daylight hours encouraged indoor activities that strengthened social bonds and cultural traditions. The workshops and studios that operated within the various cantons became centres of intensive creative activity, as artisans and scholars used the quieter season to perfect their crafts and pursue ambitious projects that required sustained concentration. The libraries and meeting halls hosted lectures, debates, and performances that enriched the intellectual life of the community while providing entertainment during the longer evenings. The religious calendar that structured spiritual observances throughout the year demonstrated the sophisticated theological framework that had evolved to accommodate both traditional Dunmer beliefs and the unprecedented reality of divine presence within the city. The major feast days honoured ancestral spirits and ancient traditions, while incorporating newer elements that acknowledged the transformative influence of Vivec's presence. The pilgrims who travelled from distant regions to participate in these celebrations brought their own perspectives and practices, creating a dynamic exchange of spiritual ideas that enriched the religious life of the entire community. The educational programs that operated within the city's various institutions reflected the cosmopolitan character of its population and the diverse needs of its economic base. The formal schools that provided basic instruction to the children of residents emphasized practical skills alongside traditional knowledge, preparing young people for the complex demands of urban life. The specialized academies that trained future priests, merchants, craftsmen, and administrators developed curricula that balanced theoretical understanding with hands-on experience, ensuring that graduates possessed both the knowledge and practical abilities necessary for success in their chosen fields. The medical and healing traditions that flourished within the city represented a synthesis of various approaches to health and wellness. The traditional Dunmer practices based on herbal remedies and spiritual healing techniques were enhanced by knowledge gained from contact with practitioners from other provinces, creating integrated treatment methods that proved more effective than any single approach alone. The hospitals and healing centres that served the population incorporated architectural features designed to promote recovery, with gardens, meditation spaces, and treatment rooms that took advantage of natural light and air circulation to create therapeutic environments. The entertainment districts that developed within various cantons provided diversions that catered to the wide range of tastes and interests represented among the city's residents and visitors. The theatres presented dramatic works that ranged from classical Dunmer epics to contemporary pieces that explored themes relevant to urban life. The music halls featured performances that showcased both traditional instruments and newer forms that had evolved from the cultural mixing that characterized the city's artistic scene. The gaming establishments offered opportunities for social interaction and friendly competition that brought together people from different backgrounds in shared pursuit of recreation and relaxation. The transportation systems that connected the city to other regions of Morrowind and beyond required constant maintenance and periodic expansion to accommodate growing trade volumes and passenger traffic. The harbour facilities that served seagoing vessels were regularly upgraded with new dock structures and cargo handling equipment that reflected advances in maritime technology. The roads that connected the city to inland destinations were improved with better drainage and more durable surfacing materials that reduced travel times and increased reliability during adverse weather conditions. The communication networks that kept the city connected to events throughout Tamriel demonstrated remarkable sophistication in their organisation and efficiency. The courier services that operated between the major cantons and external destinations maintained regular schedules that allowed for predictable delivery of messages and documents. The signal systems that used mirrors, flags, and other visual methods to convey information rapidly across distances provided early warning of approaching weather, military movements, and other significant developments that might affect the city's welfare. The waste management systems that kept the urban environment clean and healthy required innovative approaches that took advantage of the water circulation patterns within the canal network. The sewage treatment facilities that processed organic waste used natural biological processes enhanced by carefully selected plant species that filtered contaminants while producing useful byproducts. The recycling programs that recovered valuable materials from discarded items created economic opportunities while reducing the environmental impact of the concentrated population. The security arrangements that protected the city from various threats balanced the need for effective defense with the desire to maintain an open and welcoming atmosphere for legitimate visitors and residents. The guard forces that patrolled the cantons and waterways received training that emphasized crime prevention and community relations alongside traditional law enforcement skills. The intelligence networks that monitored potential threats from external enemies or internal disruption operated with discretion that protected civil liberties while maintaining the vigilance necessary for urban safety. The financial institutions that facilitated the complex economic transactions necessary for urban life developed sophisticated instruments and procedures that influenced banking practices throughout the empire. The credit systems that allowed merchants to finance large-scale trading ventures created opportunities for economic expansion that benefited both individual entrepreneurs and the broader community. The insurance arrangements that protected against losses from natural disasters, commercial failures, and other unforeseen circumstances provided stability that encouraged long-term investment and planning. The technological innovations that emerged from the concentration of skilled craftsmen and abundant resources within the city influenced development in numerous fields throughout Tamriel. The metalworking techniques that took advantage of volcanic materials unique to the region produced alloys with properties that proved valuable for both practical applications and artistic purposes. The glassmaking methods that utilized the abundant volcanic sand created products whose quality and beauty made them sought after in markets throughout the known world. The diplomatic relationships that connected the city to political centers throughout Tamriel required careful navigation of competing interests and changing alliances. The embassy districts that housed foreign representatives provided neutral ground where delicate negotiations could proceed without the complications that might arise in more politically charged environments. The ceremonial protocols that governed official interactions demonstrated respect for diverse cultural traditions, while maintaining the dignity appropriate to the city's status as a major political center. The agricultural research programs that developed improved farming methods for the challenging environmental conditions of the region created knowledge that benefited rural communities throughout Morrowind and beyond. The experimental gardens that tested new crop varieties and cultivation techniques demonstrated the practical applications of theoretical knowledge while providing food security for the urban population. The seed banks that preserved genetic diversity in agricultural plants created resources that proved invaluable during periods of crop failure or environmental stress. The architectural preservation efforts that maintained the structural integrity and aesthetic quality of the city's buildings required specialized knowledge and continuous attention to detail. The restoration projects that repaired damage from natural disasters, normal wear, and occasional conflicts employed techniques that balanced historical accuracy with practical necessity. The documentation programs that recorded architectural details and construction methods created archives that preserved knowledge for future generations while facilitating accurate restoration work. The cultural exchange programs that brought visitors from distant regions to study and learn within the city created networks of intellectual connection that spread knowledge and ideas across vast distances. The scholarly conferences that brought together experts in various fields provided forums for presenting new discoveries and debating theoretical questions that advanced understanding in multiple disciplines. The artistic residencies that invited creative practitioners to work within the city's unique environment produced works that synthesized diverse influences while contributing to the local cultural landscape. The environmental monitoring systems that track changes in air and water quality, wildlife populations, and other ecological indicators provided early warning of potential problems while documenting the long-term effects of urban development. The conservation programs that protected sensitive natural areas within and around the city balanced preservation needs with development pressures through careful planning and community engagement. The sustainability initiatives that promoted efficient resource use and waste reduction created models that influenced environmental policy throughout the region. The legacy systems that evolved to document and preserve the city's accumulated knowledge created repositories of information that served multiple generations of scholars and administrators. The record-keeping methods that tracked everything from commercial transactions to architectural modifications employed standardized formats that made historical research possible while ensuring administrative continuity during periods of political transition. The archival facilities that housed these collections incorporated environmental controls that protected fragile documents from the volcanic ash and moisture that characterized the regional climate. The social welfare programs that emerged to address the needs of the city's most vulnerable residents demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of community responsibility and mutual obligation. The charitable institutions that provided food, shelter, and medical care to those unable to support themselves operated through networks of voluntary associations and religious organizations that drew resources from across the urban community. The employment assistance programs that helped displaced workers find new opportunities created stability that benefited both individuals and the broader economic system. The emergency response systems that coordinated reactions to natural disasters, fires, and other crises reflected lessons learned from centuries of urban experience. The evacuation procedures that could move large populations quickly through the canal network utilized the same waterways that served daily transportation needs, demonstrating the multifunctional design principles that characterized the city's infrastructure. The supply distribution systems that maintained essential services during disruptions drew upon stockpiles strategically positioned throughout the various cantons to ensure rapid access when needed. The artistic patronage networks that supported creative endeavors within the city created opportunities for cultural expression that enriched the lives of both artists and audiences. The commission systems that connected wealthy sponsors with talented practitioners fostered the development of new artistic forms while preserving traditional techniques through master-apprentice relationships. The public art programs that decorated streets, buildings, and gathering spaces with sculptures, murals, and installations created a visual environment that reflected the community's values and aspirations. The philosophical schools that developed within the city's intellectual community explored fundamental questions about existence, morality, and the nature of divine influence in mortal affairs. The debate societies that provided forums for discussing these complex issues attracted participants from diverse backgrounds who brought different perspectives to age-old questions. The ethical frameworks that emerged from these discussions influenced decision-making processes throughout the city's institutions, while contributing to broader intellectual developments across Tamriel. The technological transfer programs that shared innovations with other communities created networks of knowledge exchange that accelerated development throughout the region. The apprenticeship systems that trained skilled workers in advanced techniques ensured that valuable knowledge would not be lost while creating economic opportunities for young people seeking careers in specialized fields. The research collaborations that brought together experts from different institutions fostered innovation through the combination of diverse expertise and resources. The ceremonial traditions that marked important events in the city's calendar created shared experiences that strengthened community bonds while honoring the historical developments that had shaped local identity. The parade routes that processed through multiple cantons during major celebrations demonstrated the interconnected nature of the urban community, while showcasing the achievements of different districts and organizations. The ritual observances that commemorated significant anniversaries provided opportunities for reflection on past accomplishments while setting intentions for future development. The linguistic diversity that characterized the city's population created challenges and opportunities for communication that influenced the development of new forms of expression. The translation services that facilitated interactions between speakers of different languages employed scholars who possessed not merely linguistic skills, but cultural knowledge necessary for accurate communication of meaning and intent. The educational programs that taught multiple languages to young residents prepared them for the cosmopolitan environment they would navigate as adults while preserving the linguistic heritage of various communities. The recreational facilities that provided opportunities for physical exercise and leisure activities contributed to the health and well-being of the urban population, while creating venues for social interaction across cultural boundaries. The swimming areas that took advantage of the canal system offered relief from the often oppressive heat generated by volcanic activity, while providing spaces where people from different backgrounds could interact in informal settings. The athletic competitions that drew participants and spectators from throughout the region created excitement and community pride, while demonstrating the physical capabilities developed through urban life. The transportation innovations that improved movement within the city and connections to external destinations reflected ongoing efforts to enhance efficiency while accommodating growing population and economic activity. The boat designs that optimized cargo capacity and maneuverability within the canal system employed construction techniques that balanced durability with performance requirements specific to the urban waterway environment. The bridge engineering that created increasingly sophisticated connections between cantons incorporated aesthetic considerations alongside functional necessities, resulting in structures that served as both transportation infrastructure and architectural landmarks. The commercial regulations that govern trade practices within the city balanced the need for economic freedom with protection against fraud and exploitation. The quality control systems that ensured the reliability of goods sold in local markets employed inspection procedures that maintained standards while avoiding unnecessary interference with legitimate business activities. The dispute resolution mechanisms that handled conflicts between merchants, customers, and other parties provided fair and efficient processes that maintained confidence in the commercial system. The residential development patterns that evolved within the various cantons reflected both practical considerations and social preferences that shaped community formation. The housing designs that maximized use of available space while providing adequate privacy and comfort employed architectural innovations that took advantage of the unique environmental conditions created by the urban water system. The neighborhood organizations that emerged to address local concerns created democratic structures that gave residents voice in decisions affecting their daily lives while fostering cooperation on shared challenges. The public health initiatives that protected the urban population from disease and environmental hazards demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the connections between living conditions and community well-being. The sanitation systems that maintained clean water supplies and waste disposal utilized both engineering solutions and community education to prevent contamination and disease transmission. The medical research programs that studied health conditions specific to urban environments contributed knowledge that benefited not only local residents, but populations throughout the region. The information systems that kept residents informed about events, opportunities, and developments affecting their lives employed multiple communication methods that reached diverse audiences through their preferred channels. The public announcement procedures that conveyed official information utilized both traditional methods like posted notices and innovative approaches that took advantage of the city's unique acoustic properties. The news distribution networks that shared information about external events kept the urban community connected to broader regional and imperial developments while maintaining local focus. The economic development strategies that promoted growth while maintaining stability required careful balance between encouraging innovation and preserving the foundations of existing prosperity. The investment incentives that attracted new businesses and industries to the city created opportunities for expansion while ensuring that development served community interests rather than purely private gain. The market analysis programs that tracked economic trends provided information necessary for informed decision-making by both public officials and private entrepreneurs. The conflict resolution systems that addressed disputes between individuals, groups, and institutions provided alternatives to violence while maintaining social order and justice. The mediation services that helped parties reach mutually acceptable solutions employed trained facilitators who understood both legal principles and cultural sensitivities relevant to different types of conflicts. The legal precedents that emerged from these processes created frameworks for handling similar situations while adapting to changing circumstances and community values. The environmental adaptation strategies that helped the city cope with the challenges posed by volcanic activity and other natural phenomena demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in working with, rather than against, natural forces. The air filtration systems that protected indoor spaces from volcanic ash employed both mechanical devices and carefully selected plant species that absorbed particulates while contributing to aesthetic appeal. The structural reinforcement programs that strengthened buildings against seismic activity utilized both traditional construction wisdom and innovative engineering approaches that enhanced safety without compromising architectural integrity. The cultural preservation efforts that maintained connections to ancestral traditions while embracing contemporary developments created continuity that strengthened community identity across generations. The storytelling traditions that passed down historical knowledge through oral narrative employed techniques that made complex information accessible and memorable while adapting to changing audience needs and interests. The craft traditions that preserved ancient skills while incorporating new materials and methods created products that honored the past while serving contemporary purposes. The spiritual guidance systems that addressed the religious and philosophical needs of the diverse urban population provided support for personal development while fostering community harmony. The counseling services that helped individuals navigate life challenges employed approaches that respected different cultural backgrounds while drawing upon shared human experiences of growth and struggle. The ritual observances that marked important life transitions created meaningful ceremonies that honored individual milestones while strengthening community bonds. The educational innovations that prepared young people for the complex demands of urban life in a changing world balanced traditional knowledge with contemporary skills while fostering critical thinking and adaptability. The curriculum development programs that created learning materials specific to local conditions and opportunities employed educational theories that recognized diverse learning styles and cultural perspectives. The teacher training initiatives that prepared instructors for work in multicultural environments emphasized both subject matter expertise and interpersonal skills necessary for effective communication across cultural boundaries. As the centuries passed and the city continued to evolve, the accumulated wisdom of generations of residents created an institutional memory that guided decision-making while preserving the flexibility necessary for adaptation to changing circumstances. The governance structures that emerged from this experience balanced democratic participation with efficient administration while maintaining accountability to the community they served. The planning processes that shaped future development drew upon historical lessons while remaining open to innovative approaches that might better serve emerging needs and opportunities. The legacy of achievement that defined the city's character inspired continued excellence while creating expectations that challenged each generation to surpass the accomplishments of their predecessors. The cultural standards that evolved from centuries of artistic and intellectual achievement established benchmarks for quality that maintained the city's reputation while encouraging creative innovation. The civic pride that residents felt in their community's accomplishments motivated continued investment in shared institutions and public spaces that served the common good while reflecting individual contributions to collective success. The networks of influence that connected the city to centers of power throughout Tamriel created opportunities for political and economic advancement while establishing responsibilities for regional leadership and imperial service. The diplomatic relationships that linked local institutions to external organizations provided channels for cooperation and mutual support while maintaining the autonomy necessary for local self-determination. The cultural exchanges that brought new ideas and perspectives to the urban community enriched local traditions while contributing to broader intellectual and artistic developments across the known world. The technological achievements that emerged from the concentration of resources and expertise within the city influenced development throughout the region while creating competitive advantages that sustained economic prosperity across multiple generations. The research initiatives that pushed the boundaries of knowledge in fields, ranging from engineering to natural philosophy, established the city as a center of learning that attracted scholars and students from distant provinces. The practical applications that resulted from this research created innovations that improved daily life while generating economic returns that supported continued investment in intellectual advancement. The social institutions that evolved to address the complex needs of urban life created frameworks for cooperation and mutual support that strengthened community resilience while preserving individual freedom and opportunity. The voluntary associations that brought together people with shared interests and concerns provided mechanisms for collective action while fostering personal relationships that enriched social life. The democratic traditions that developed within these organizations created experience with participatory governance that influenced broader political developments while maintaining local autonomy and cultural distinctiveness. The mysteries that surrounded the daily operations of the Palace of Vivec extended far beyond what casual observers could perceive from the canal-side perspectives available to ordinary citizens. Within the uppermost chambers of that magnificent structure, chambers that seemed to exist partially outside conventional spatial limitations, the living God conducted affairs that touched upon matters both temporal and eternal. The architecture itself appeared to respond to the divine presence, with corridors that reconfigured themselves according to needs that transcended mortal understanding, and windows that offered views of landscapes that existed in realms adjacent to mundane reality. The administrative systems that governed the city from these elevated halls operated according to principles that blended conventional bureaucratic practice with metaphysical considerations that reflected the unique nature of divine rule. The scribes and officials who served within the palace hierarchy possessed training that encompassed not merely record-keeping and policy implementation, but also the subtle arts of interpreting divine will as it manifested through seemingly mundane administrative decisions. The documents that flowed through these channels contained layers of meaning that operated simultaneously on practical and mystical levels, creating governance structures that served both immediate municipal needs and cosmic purposes that might not become apparent for centuries. The audiences that took place within the great halls of the palace brought together petitioners from across Morrowind and beyond, each seeking resolution to problems that ranged from simple commercial disputes to complex theological questions that touched upon the fundamental nature of existence itself. The divine presence that presided over these proceedings possessed awareness that encompassed not merely the immediate circumstances presented by each case, but also the far-reaching implications that individual decisions might have for the broader patterns of fate and destiny that governed mortal affairs. The judgments that emerged from these audiences often surprised observers with their apparent simplicity, yet those who possessed deeper understanding recognized the profound wisdom that addressed multiple levels of causation simultaneously. The private chambers where Vivec retreated for contemplation and personal renewal contained furnishings and decorations that reflected the accumulated experiences of centuries spent navigating the complex boundaries between mortal and divine existence. The libraries housed within these spaces contained not merely books and scrolls, but crystallized memories and concentrated experiences that could be accessed through meditation techniques that transcended conventional reading. The artifacts displayed throughout these rooms included objects of power that had been gathered from across the known world, each chosen for properties that contributed to the maintenance of cosmic balance and the preservation of wisdom that might otherwise be lost to the passage of time. The workshops and laboratories hidden within the palace depths pursued research into questions that combined practical concerns with theoretical investigations that pushed the boundaries of knowledge in multiple disciplines simultaneously. The experiments conducted within these spaces often required materials and conditions that could only be obtained through divine intervention, creating opportunities for discoveries that would have been impossible for purely mortal researchers. The results of this research influenced developments throughout the city and beyond, though the connections between palace investigations and subsequent innovations in fields ranging from architecture to agriculture often remained invisible to those who benefited from the practical applications. The seasonal rhythms that governed palace life reflected both celestial cycles and the unique temporal perspectives available to divine consciousness. The ceremonies that marked important transitions throughout the year incorporated elements that honored traditional observances while introducing innovations that reflected evolving understanding of cosmic relationships. The festivals that radiated outward from the palace to encompass the entire urban community created shared experiences that strengthened the bonds between divine authority and mortal citizenship, while providing opportunities for cultural expression that enriched the lives of all participants. The diplomatic protocols that governed interactions between the palace and external political entities required careful navigation of competing claims to authority and legitimacy. The ambassadors and representatives who sought audiences with Vivec brought not merely the official positions of their respective governments, but also the hopes and fears of populations who looked to divine intervention for solutions to problems that exceeded purely mortal capabilities. The agreements and treaties that emerged from these negotiations often included provisions that operated on metaphysical levels alongside conventional political arrangements, creating frameworks for cooperation that transcended normal diplomatic categories. The educational programs that operated under palace auspices provided instruction that encompassed both practical skills and theoretical knowledge, while introducing students to perspectives that could only be gained through contact with divine consciousness. The curricula developed for these programs balanced traditional academic subjects with mystical disciplines that prepared graduates for roles that required understanding of both mortal limitations and divine possibilities. The graduates of these programs carried their enhanced perspectives throughout Tamriel, influencing developments in fields ranging from magical research to philosophical inquiry, while maintaining connections to their alma mater that created networks of influence extending far beyond Morrowind's borders. The artistic patronage that flowed from the palace encouraged creative expressions that explored themes of transformation, transcendence, and the relationship between temporal and eternal concerns. The commissions that supported painters, sculptors, musicians, and writers created works that challenged conventional artistic boundaries, while producing beauty that inspired both aesthetic appreciation and spiritual contemplation. The performance spaces within the palace hosted presentations that combined entertainment with instruction, using artistic media to convey truths that might prove too complex or subtle for purely verbal expression. The healing centers that operated under palace guidance provided medical care that integrated physical treatment with spiritual intervention, creating therapeutic approaches that addressed both immediate symptoms and underlying causes that might extend beyond purely biological factors. The practitioners who staffed these facilities possessed training that encompassed conventional medical knowledge while incorporating techniques for working with energies and influences that affected health and well-being through non-material pathways. The research conducted within these centers contributed to medical knowledge throughout the region, while developing treatment methods that took advantage of the unique resources and conditions available within the urban environment. The security arrangements that protected the palace and its inhabitants from various types of threats operated through methods that combined conventional defensive measures with supernatural protections that reflected divine authority and power. The guard forces that maintained visible presence throughout the palace grounds possessed training that prepared them for challenges ranging from ordinary criminal activity to mystical attacks that might originate from hostile forces operating in adjacent realms. The intelligence networks that monitored potential threats drew information from sources that included both mundane observation and divination techniques that provided early warning of dangers that might not become apparent through conventional surveillance methods. The transportation systems that connected the palace to other locations throughout the city and beyond utilized both ordinary methods and extraordinary capabilities that reflected the unique nature of divine mobility. The official processions that moved through the urban landscape during ceremonial occasions created spectacles that demonstrated divine presence while providing opportunities for direct contact between ruler and subjects. The private travel arrangements that facilitated movement for purposes ranging from administrative necessity to personal recreation employed techniques that could compress distances and transcend normal limitations of time and space. The communication networks that kept the palace connected to developments throughout Morrowind and across Tamriel operated through channels that included both conventional message systems and mystical methods that provided instantaneous contact across vast distances. The intelligence-gathering operations that monitored political, economic, and social trends drew information from sources that ranged from ordinary diplomatic correspondence to supernatural surveillance that could penetrate even the most carefully guarded secrets. The decision-making processes that utilized this information balanced immediate tactical considerations with strategic planning that encompassed timescales extending far beyond normal mortal perspectives. The economic systems that supported palace operations and broader municipal functions required resource management that balanced competing demands while maintaining the prosperity necessary for continued urban growth and development. The taxation policies that generated revenue for public services operated through assessment methods that considered not merely immediate financial capacity, but also long-term economic health and social stability. The investment strategies that allocated resources among various projects and programs reflected priorities that encompassed both practical necessities and visionary initiatives that might not yield benefits for decades or centuries. The legal frameworks that governed behavior within the palace and throughout the urban community combined traditional jurisprudence with divine law that operated according to principles that transcended purely human concepts of justice and fairness. The court systems that adjudicated disputes and criminal cases employed procedures that balanced individual rights with community welfare, while taking into account factors that included spiritual considerations alongside material evidence. The enforcement mechanisms that ensured compliance with legal decisions utilized both conventional penalties and sanctions that operated through metaphysical channels to influence behavior through means that affected consciousness and destiny. The agricultural programs that ensured food security for the urban population required coordination between palace administration and rural communities throughout the region. The land management policies that governed farming practices balanced productivity requirements with environmental protection, while encouraging innovations that improved yields without depleting soil or water resources. The distribution systems that moved agricultural products from rural production areas to urban markets employed transportation networks and storage facilities that minimized waste while ensuring adequate supplies during seasonal variations and periodic shortages. The technological development initiatives that emerged from palace-sponsored research created innovations that improved life quality while generating economic opportunities for craftsmen and entrepreneurs throughout the urban community. The patent systems that protected intellectual property rights encouraged continued innovation while ensuring that beneficial discoveries would eventually become available for widespread application. The quality control programs that maintained standards for manufactured goods balanced consumer protection with support for local industries that provided employment and economic stability. The environmental monitoring programs that tracked ecological changes throughout the region provided early warning of potential problems while documenting the long-term effects of urban development and population growth. The conservation initiatives that protected sensitive natural areas balanced preservation needs with development pressures through planning processes that incorporated both scientific analysis and spiritual considerations. The sustainability policies that promoted efficient resource use and waste reduction created models that influenced environmental practices throughout Morrowind and beyond. The cultural exchange programs that brought visitors from distant regions to study and participate in urban life created opportunities for learning that enriched both guests and hosts, while strengthening diplomatic relationships and commercial connections. The scholarly conferences that convened experts in various fields provided forums for presenting research and debating theoretical questions while fostering collaboration that advanced knowledge in multiple disciplines. The artistic residencies that invited creative practitioners to work within the unique environment of the city produced works that synthesized diverse influences while contributing to local cultural development. The public works projects that maintained and improved urban infrastructure required engineering expertise that combined conventional construction techniques with innovative approaches that took advantage of the city's unique geographical and environmental conditions. The water management systems that controlled flow through the canal network employed both mechanical devices and mystical influences to maintain optimal conditions for transportation, sanitation, and aesthetic appeal. The waste disposal programs that processed organic and inorganic materials utilized recycling methods that recovered valuable resources while minimizing environmental impact. The emergency preparedness systems that coordinated responses to natural disasters and other crises drew upon accumulated experience with volcanic activity, flooding, and seismic events that periodically threatened the urban community. The evacuation procedures that could move large populations quickly and safely utilized transportation networks and temporary shelter facilities that had been established through careful advance planning. The supply distribution systems that maintained essential services during disruptions employed stockpiling strategies and alternative sourcing arrangements that ensured continuity of basic necessities. The social welfare programs that addressed the needs of vulnerable populations demonstrated sophisticated understanding of community responsibility and mutual obligation. The charitable institutions that provided food, shelter, and medical care operated through networks of voluntary associations and religious organizations that drew resources from throughout the urban community. The employment assistance programs that helped displaced workers find new opportunities created stability that benefited both individuals and the broader economic system while maintaining dignity and self-reliance. The recreational facilities that provided opportunities for physical exercise and leisure activities contributed to community health and well-being while creating venues for social interaction across cultural and economic boundaries. The parks and gardens that offered respite from urban density employed landscape design that balanced aesthetic appeal with practical functions, including air purification and temperature moderation. The athletic competitions that drew participants and spectators from throughout the region created excitement and community pride, while demonstrating the physical capabilities developed through urban life. The transportation innovations that improved movement within the city and connections to external destinations reflected ongoing efforts to enhance efficiency while accommodating growing population and economic activity. The harbour improvements that expanded capacity for seagoing vessels employed engineering techniques that protected shipping from volcanic ash and seismic activity, while facilitating cargo handling and passenger services. The road maintenance programs that kept overland routes in good condition utilized materials and methods that resisted damage from environmental conditions while reducing travel times and transportation costs. The financial institutions that facilitated complex economic transactions employed sophisticated instruments and procedures that influenced banking practices throughout the empire. The credit systems that supported large-scale commercial ventures created opportunities for economic expansion while managing risks through diversification and careful assessment of borrower capabilities. The insurance arrangements that protected against losses from natural disasters and commercial failures provided stability that encouraged long-term investment and planning. The diplomatic relationships that connected the city to political centres throughout Tamriel required careful navigation of competing interests and changing alliances while maintaining the independence necessary for local self-determination. The treaty negotiations that established formal agreements with external powers balanced mutual benefits with protection of local interests and values. The cultural diplomacy programs that promoted understanding and cooperation through educational and artistic exchanges created relationships that transcended purely political considerations while building foundations for lasting peace and prosperity. The military preparations that ensured defense capability while maintaining peaceful intentions employed training programs and equipment acquisition that balanced deterrent effect with resource efficiency. The strategic planning processes that anticipated potential threats analyze both conventional military challenges and supernatural dangers that might require specialized responses. The alliance relationships that provided mutual defense arrangements created security networks that enhanced regional stability while preserving local autonomy and cultural distinctiveness. The philosophical schools that explored fundamental questions about existence, morality, and divine influence attracted scholars and students from throughout the known world, while contributing to intellectual developments that influenced thought across multiple cultures and civilizations. The research programs that investigated theoretical questions pushed the boundaries of knowledge while producing practical applications that improved daily life and expanded human capabilities. The publication efforts that disseminated discoveries and insights created communication networks that accelerated intellectual progress while preserving wisdom for future generations. The artistic traditions that evolved within the unique environment of the city created new forms of expression that combined influences from multiple cultures while developing distinctly local characteristics that reflected the specific conditions and opportunities available in this remarkable urban setting. The performance venues that hosted theatrical presentations, musical concerts, and other cultural events provided forums for creative expression while fostering community appreciation for beauty and artistic achievement. The craft guilds that preserved traditional techniques while encouraging innovation created products that demonstrated the highest levels of skill and artistry while serving practical needs and aesthetic desires. The religious institutions that served the spiritual needs of the diverse urban population provided guidance and support while fostering understanding and cooperation among different faith traditions and cultural practices. The ceremonial observances that marked important events in the religious calendar created opportunities for shared experience while honoring the diverse backgrounds and beliefs represented within the community. The theological studies that explored questions of divine nature and human purpose contributed to spiritual understanding while maintaining respect for different approaches to ultimate questions. The legacy preservation efforts that documented and maintained the accumulated wisdom and achievements of previous generations created resources that guided current decision-making while ensuring that valuable knowledge would not be lost to future communities. The archival systems that organized and protected historical records employed both conventional storage methods and mystical preservation techniques that protected fragile materials from environmental damage and temporal decay. The educational programs that transmitted cultural knowledge and institutional memory prepared new generations for leadership responsibilities while maintaining continuity with ancestral wisdom and traditional values. As the years flowed like the eternal currents through the city's waterways, the accumulated experiences and wisdom of countless generations created an institutional foundation that supported continued growth and adaptation while preserving the essential characteristics that defined the unique identity of this remarkable urban community. The governance structures that had evolved through centuries of experimentation and refinement balanced democratic participation with efficient administration while maintaining accountability to the diverse populations they served. The cultural traditions that had developed through the interaction of multiple influences created a distinctive local identity that honored its various sources while expressing something entirely new and unprecedented in the history of Tamriel. The economic networks that connected the city to markets throughout the known world created prosperity that supported both individual advancement and collective welfare while maintaining the stability necessary for long-term planning and investment. The technological innovations that emerged from the concentration of resources and expertise influenced development throughout the region while creating competitive advantages that sustained prosperity across multiple generations. The social institutions that addressed the complex needs of urban life provided frameworks for cooperation and mutual support while preserving individual freedom and cultural diversity. The educational systems that prepared young people for the challenges and opportunities of contemporary life balanced traditional knowledge with innovative approaches while fostering critical thinking and adaptability. The healthcare networks that maintained community health and well-being integrated multiple approaches to healing while advancing medical knowledge through research and practical experience. The environmental stewardship programs that protected natural resources while accommodating development needs created sustainable practices that served as models for communities throughout the region. The cultural achievements that distinguished the city as a center of learning and artistic excellence attracted visitors and students from distant provinces, while contributing to intellectual and creative developments that enriched civilization throughout the empire. The diplomatic relationships that connected local institutions to external organizations provided channels for cooperation and mutual benefit, while maintaining the autonomy necessary for self-determination and cultural preservation. The spiritual traditions that addressed questions of meaning and purpose provided guidance and comfort while fostering understanding and respect among diverse populations. The technological capabilities that supported urban life and economic activity demonstrated remarkable sophistication in their integration of multiple systems and approaches, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for adaptation to changing conditions and emerging opportunities. The communication networks that kept the community connected to developments throughout Tamriel employed both conventional methods and innovative techniques while ensuring that information flowed efficiently to those who needed it for decision-making and planning purposes. The transportation infrastructure that facilitated movement within the city and connections to external destinations reflected ongoing investment in systems that served both immediate practical needs and long-term strategic objectives while adapting to technological advances and changing patterns of use. The security arrangements that protected the community from various types of threats balanced effective defense with preservation of the open and welcoming atmosphere that characterized urban life, while maintaining vigilance against dangers that might threaten public safety and community welfare. The final chapters of Vivec City's extraordinary existence unfolded during the tumultuous events of the late Third Era, when the very foundations of Dunmer civilization began to show the strain of millennia-long deceptions and divine machinations. The city that had stood as a testament to the successful fusion of mortal ambition and divine authority found itself increasingly vulnerable to forces that its creators had never fully anticipated or prepared to confront. The signs of approaching transformation manifested first in subtle ways that only the most perceptive observers recognized as harbingers of fundamental change. The water levels in the canal system began fluctuating according to patterns that defied both natural cycles and the carefully maintained hydraulic controls that had regulated flow for centuries. The volcanic glass incorporated into palace architecture started exhibiting optical properties that created disturbing visual effects during certain atmospheric conditions, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their supposed sources. The administrative systems that had functioned with clockwork precision for generations began experiencing inexplicable delays and miscommunications that frustrated even the most experienced bureaucrats. Documents disappeared from secure archives only to reappear in locations where they had no logical reason to exist, while official correspondence arrived at destinations bearing messages that differed subtly but significantly from what the senders claimed to have written. Within the palace chambers, the divine presence that had provided stable guidance for so many centuries grew increasingly erratic in its manifestations and decisions. The audiences that had once proceeded according to well-established protocols became unpredictable affairs, where petitioners might find their cases resolved, through pronouncements that seemed to address entirely different questions than those they had presented. The scribes and officials who served the administrative hierarchy reported growing difficulty in interpreting divine will as it manifested through increasingly cryptic and contradictory instructions. The scholarly institutions that had long served as centers of learning and research found their investigations disrupted by phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. The libraries housed within the temple canton experienced episodes where texts would alter their contents while being read, with words and passages shifting to convey meanings that contradicted established historical and theological understanding. The experimental facilities where natural philosophers pursued their investigations reported equipment failures and anomalous results that suggested the basic laws governing physical phenomena were becoming unstable. The economic networks that had sustained urban prosperity through centuries of careful cultivation began showing signs of systemic stress as trading relationships that had seemed secure for generations suddenly collapsed without apparent cause. Merchant houses that had maintained profitable operations across multiple provinces found their contracts voided by partners who claimed to have no memory of the original agreements, while banking institutions discovered that their financial records contained discrepancies that could not be explained through conventional accounting errors. The social fabric that had held the diverse urban community together through countless challenges started unraveling as residents reported experiences that challenged their understanding of personal identity and collective memory. Families discovered that their ancestral histories contained contradictions and impossibilities that suggested fundamental alterations in the past itself, while community leaders found themselves unable to reconcile conflicting accounts of recent events that multiple witnesses swore they had observed directly. The religious observances that had provided spiritual guidance and community cohesion became sources of confusion and conflict, as traditional rituals produced unexpected results that disturbed both participants and observers. The ceremonies dedicated to ancestral veneration began manifesting apparitions that bore little resemblance to the honored dead they were supposed to represent, while the festivals celebrating seasonal transitions occurred at times that corresponded to no recognizable calendar or astronomical cycle. The defensive systems that had protected the city from external threats proved inadequate against dangers that emerged from within the urban environment itself. The guard forces that patrolled the cantons and waterways reported encounters with entities that appeared to be familiar residents, but exhibited behaviors and knowledge that suggested they were something else entirely. The intelligence networks that monitored potential security risks found themselves investigating threats that seemed to multiply and transform, even as they attempted to gather information about their nature and origins. The transportation infrastructure that had facilitated movement throughout the urban area began experiencing disruptions that defied both mechanical explanation and magical intervention. The bridges that connected the various cantons developed structural problems that repair crews could not locate or correct, while the waterways themselves seemed to change their courses overnight in ways that contradicted both established geography and the laws governing fluid dynamics. The medical facilities that had maintained community health reported an epidemic of psychological disorders characterized by memory disturbances and identity confusion that resisted all conventional treatments. The healers who staffed these institutions found themselves treating patients who claimed to remember events that had never occurred while forgetting experiences that other witnesses confirmed they had shared. The research into these conditions revealed patterns that suggested external influence rather than natural disease processes, but the sources of this influence remained frustratingly elusive. The educational institutions that had prepared young people for productive roles within the urban community discovered that their curricula were becoming obsolete, as the skills and knowledge they transmitted proved increasingly irrelevant to conditions that no longer followed predictable patterns. The teachers who had devoted their careers to instruction found themselves unable to provide guidance to students whose questions addressed situations that exceeded the boundaries of established wisdom and experience. The artistic communities that had flourished within the city's creative environment struggled to express experiences that transcended conventional aesthetic categories and communication methods. The painters who attempted to capture the visual anomalies they observed found their pigments refusing to adhere to canvas in the intended patterns, while musicians discovered that their instruments produced sounds that conveyed emotions and meanings they had never intended to evoke. The agricultural systems that supported the urban population began failing as crops exhibited growth patterns that defied both natural biology and magical enhancement. The farmers who tended the terraced gardens and managed the aquaculture facilities reported harvests that changed their characteristics between the time of gathering and consumption, with foods that appeared nutritious and flavorful, transforming into substances that provided no sustenance and left consumers feeling hungrier than before they had eaten. The technological innovations that had distinguished the city as a center of advancement and progress proved unreliable as devices and systems that had functioned perfectly for decades suddenly began producing results that contradicted their designed purposes. The hydraulic mechanisms that controlled water flow through the canal network operated according to principles that seemed to change from day to day, while the architectural features that had provided both functional and aesthetic benefits developed properties that served neither purpose effectively. The diplomatic relationships that had connected the city to external political entities became increasingly strained as ambassadors and representatives reported that their negotiations were being undermined by factors that appeared to involve alterations in the fundamental terms of reality itself. The treaties and agreements that had been carefully crafted to serve mutual interests found themselves invalidated by changes in circumstances that no party had anticipated or could control. The culmination of these mounting crises arrived with the events that would later be known as the Narration prophecies, when the accumulated contradictions and impossibilities that had been building within the city's reality finally reached a breaking point that could no longer be contained or ignored. The figure who emerged to challenge the established order represented not merely a political or military threat, but a fundamental disruption to the metaphysical foundations upon which the entire urban civilization had been constructed. The confrontations that followed revealed the extent to which the divine authority that had governed the city for millennia had been built upon deceptions and manipulations that were finally being exposed to scrutiny they could not withstand. The revelations that emerged from these investigations shattered the theological framework that had provided meaning and purpose for countless generations, while leaving the urban community to grapple with questions that had no comfortable answers. The physical manifestations of this metaphysical crisis transformed the urban landscape itself as the carefully maintained balance between natural forces and divine intervention collapsed into chaos that threatened the continued existence of the city as a habitable environment. The waterways that had provided both practical infrastructure and aesthetic beauty became torrents that carved new channels through districts that had stood unchanged for centuries, while the architectural marvels that had demonstrated the successful fusion of mortal craft and divine inspiration began exhibiting structural failures that no amount of engineering expertise could address. The evacuation efforts that attempted to preserve the urban population from the escalating dangers proved only partially successful, as the transportation networks that had facilitated movement throughout the city became unreliable and dangerous. The bridges that had connected the various cantons collapsed or disappeared entirely, while the waterways themselves became impassable due to currents and obstacles that appeared and vanished according to no predictable pattern. The final destruction arrived not through external conquest or natural disaster, but through the internal collapse of the contradictions that had been accumulating within the city's reality for generations. The divine presence that had provided the stable center around which the entire urban civilization had organized itself simply ceased to exist in the form that residents had known and depended upon, leaving behind a vacuum that the carefully constructed social and physical infrastructure could not survive. The legacy of Vivec City persists not in its physical remains, which were scattered by the catastrophic events that followed its abandonment, but in the memories and influences that its centuries of existence embedded within the broader culture of Morrowind and Tamriel. The innovations in urban planning, technological development, and social organization that emerged from its unique environment continue to influence communities throughout the known world, while the artistic and intellectual achievements that flourished within its cosmopolitan atmosphere remain sources of inspiration for those who seek to understand the possibilities and limitations of mortal ambition. The stories that preserve the memory of this extraordinary urban experiment serve as both celebration and warning, demonstrating the remarkable heights that can be achieved through the successful integration of diverse influences and capabilities, while illustrating the dangers inherent in building civilizations upon foundations that cannot withstand the test of ultimate truth. In the end, Vivec City stands as a testament to the temporary nature of all mortal achievements and the eternal human desire to transcend the limitations that define ordinary existence. The lessons embedded within its rise and fall continue to resonate through the ages, offering guidance to those who would build new communities, while reminding them that even the most magnificent accomplishments must eventually yield to forces beyond mortal control or comprehension. In the twilight hours, when the boundaries between memory and dream grow thin, travelers along the coast of Vardenfell sometimes report glimpsing the phantom outlines of cantons and bridges shimmering in the mist above waters that now flow freely toward the sea, carrying with them the last echoes of a city that once defied the very foundations of reality itself.